So I am so pleased to have this panel with us today. We have four fantastic representatives of their universities: Casey Flynn, Shauna Thompson, Mandy Cole, and Ken Thornton.
What we're going to talk about, all five of us, is how they used automated workforce management during this particular crisis, and sort of extrapolating out how it helped them, and in some cases even, where they think they were prepared or could be better prepared in the future. It's a very exciting time. It's a very tumultuous time. I have to say I've learned a ton from this panel about how the flexibility, accountability, and visibility have helped them be in a better position to be able to handle some of the truly unexpected requirements that have come up during this pandemic. Sometimes we think about workforce management just like in the simplest terms that we can, clocking in and clocking out, tracking time, producing paychecks. All this, of course, all this is important. But during this crisis, it really wasn't enough. And with speaking with these panelists, what you see is that every day they had changing rules and regs that they had to function to, changing questions from their leadership, information that leadership and executives needed. And even things changed within the regulations where they weren't in final form, and they changed them halfway through, and they had to adjust and get additional data, additional information, create different buckets for accruals and things like that. So that's where the flexibility really came in, that the use of the system allowed them to be flexible in how they manipulated the information, how they collected it, and how they stored it. We've really been hearing huge things too about how to keep the workforce engaged and productive as much as possible. Working remotely is not a comfortable and common thing within higher education, and we've really had to adjust to that. And a lot of what you'll hear from our panels too are things about how dashboards and alternate methods for logging in and out really have help the managers hold their employees accountable, but also for being able to determine where people are needing additional help. And lastly, the visibility piece of it, which has just been a huge theme all along, even before the pandemic hit us. But now you can't actually see your employees anymore. And it's tougher to see how your employees are doing. There isn't the possibility to sort of manage by walking around. So how are we doing that? And analytics and measurement seems to have been a key part of how we keep our remote workforce in our sites. And it is really interesting within the changing environment. The stuff that I've learned in talking to this panel has even changed from the first time we talked all the way up until yesterday, and probably will continue beyond. So I really appreciate the panel coming to talk to us today about all their different experiences and the insights that they have. I really feel lucky to interact with them on a regular basis, and I feel really privileged to have them share their insights with you. So first, let me introduce the panel. We have these four today. Casey Flynn is our first speaker, and she's currently serving not only as the executive director of Humboldt State University Sponsored Programs Foundation, but she's also the president of the Auxiliary Organization Association for the California State University System. They oversee an enormous amount of research activity within her organization, and she's been using the Workforce Ready product in managing all of the grants and research that she's done. So welcome, Casey. Thanks for coming. Then we have Shauna Thompson from PACE. Shauna is the Senior Director for Administrative Information Systems and Payroll, and she's served in a variety of roles during the 10 years she has been at PACE, starting as a system administrator and leading her up to the director of her department. Shauna is a longtime user of Kronos, has been using the Workforce Central platform through this crisis, and we're thankful for Shauna being with us today. We also have Mandy Cole from Kansas State with us today. Mandy's the Assistant Vice President for Operations Strategy in the Administrative Support Center for the university. After she graduated from the University of Iowa, she went straight to K-State, and she's been there for 11 years in a variety of different roles and departments. She currently manages the coordination of the university's restructuring and identification of efficiencies, and participates heavily in other university-wide initiatives. She's also the director of the Administrative Support Center, and with her team, she processes payroll and HR documents while identifying other internal process efficiencies. We love working with Mandy. She's very insightful and very strategic in how she views her role and the role of Kronos within her university. So thank you, Mandy, for being with us here as well. And last but not least, we have Ken Thornton. He's also joining us today. He's the lead HR system administrator at Temple. He's been there since 2011. He used to work at Kronos, and he's implementing the system that he currently oversees. He implemented that system himself. So he manages over 11,000 employees, including 4,000 student workers in a variety of roles, including academic, athletic, facilities, campus safety, auxiliary, and medical, which is very interesting to hear Ken's viewpoint on how things that started in the medical unit ended up kind of being utilized across the university. So he is also with us today, and we thank Ken for being there as well. So Casey, if you don't mind, let's just start with you. You've had this unique view of seeing how higher education has been managed, both on your side with Kronos and actually on the university side where they were not using Kronos. Any experiences or insights that you have from seeing that? And also, how was it working on your side as well? What did you see just within your own area?
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and thank you for having me today. I think, March was a challenging and interesting time in a lot of ways, and one of the stark differences between how we were able to pivot our operations remotely versus the campus was that we had gone through that process about a year ago to automate our payroll. So we've been established since 1952, and we had been on paper timesheets that entire time. We just, as of last year, implemented Kronos Workforce Ready. So we're now in a paperless timekeeping system. Having the benefit of a year to implement and to figure out all the kinks and to make a system that really worked for us allows us to have that comfort level and know that we don't have to physically be interacting with our customers and routing paper timesheets for signatures and chasing down paper forms. So when COVID happened, that wasn't even one of the of all the things we had to troubleshoot and learn how to adjust. That was one that we had the sigh of relief. Oh, we don't have to worry so much about our payroll submissions. That's already taken care of. What else do we need to make accommodations and make revisions for? Versus on the university side, with the California State University, our state controller's office has a very dated system, and the CSU system has been trying for about a decade to get a common HR in place. But for the meantime, student employees, intermittent hourlies are on paper time cards. So that was one of the big differences I could see between how we were able to really say, this is not an area necessarily of concern and something that we have to address and try to troubleshoot in this new environment. This is something we're good with, versus the university had to, in one pay period, essentially had 2 weeks to figure out how to translate an entire paper-based payroll system into something that can work when you can't have a student physically on campus, turning in that time card and getting it signed and submitting to payroll by a deadline. That's a very short window to have to figure it out. And we have an amazing payroll staff that, to their credit, put together a strategy, in a few days. But when it came out, it was essentially a giant Google Doc of ways to submit time and hours and approvals. And I received the same notice that the entire campus did, as far as here's the approach of how we're going to deal with payroll on the state side. And I looked at it with my staff member who manages Kronos, and we both just said, thank God we've already gone through that and done that. That's not something that we have to approach, because it got through the emergency, but it was such a heavy lift in a short amount of time. And of all the things you're juggling, you don't want to try to recreate a system in 2 weeks and to try to put together something that's going to affect so many different users in so many ways that you don't have time to troubleshoot and to work out all the kinks, the benefit that we had. So we were really thankful to see that first payroll happen after March, when all of our employees had gone to telecommuting and were in their remote environments, to not see payroll as one of the pain points. We have lots of others to work through, but that was one that we felt very secure and comfortable with, because we had been in that environment for a while, compared to the university that was really just trying to make something work in a very short turnaround time. So that was a great example and kind of a contrast between putting in the time to figure it out before you find yourself in that emergency mode.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you had lots of people in remote locations as well. How did that work out?
I think, where we are geographically, so we're at the top of the state in a pretty remote county. So all of our employees are either remote and teleworking or have very limited central personnel on campus. The biggest challenge, whether it's payroll or not, is our broadband, our Wi-Fi connectivity. So for the most part, our employees are able to get access to log into their computer, if not every day, at least intermittently or once per pay period. But that transition, the internet component was probably the biggest challenge. But we've had that even pre-COVID. During the summer when we have field work, we have employees that are out in remote areas that don't have Wi-Fi or cell reception, and they have to travel into areas that they can connect and get online to do whatever business they need to, at least every few weeks. So that didn't really change because of COVID. That's an adaptation that I think we've already had to just make our norm business process, because every summer we have the same situation to navigate, whether you're in a pandemic or not. Remote work is something that we've already had to kind of grapple with long term.
Casey, what else? You had to make some adjustments along the way. How did you find that process?
I think the biggest adjustments from a payroll standpoint when this happened was there were so many legislative changes, right? We had COVID emergency leave at a state level, at a system level, at a federal level. You had a lot of emergency leave accruals and different types of benefits that our employees were going to be able to tap into. And those laws were being written, day after day. And so you're really trying to chase, what do I need to make available to my employee today? And then tomorrow there might be something new that I need to adapt and create and build out. So one of the nice things that we had the benefit of is that we were able to make those adjustments to our leave policies and to implement very quick internal processes to say, okay, if a supervisor is approving emergency leave, or if somebody is diagnosed and they need to tap into those new types of accruals and credits that didn't exist last week, how do you make that available to them, and how do you weave that into the workflow? And as soon as we asked that question, we were able to figure it out in a day or two. I mean, the troubleshooting with our system was extremely easy, because you're able to add and subtract different types of credits through Workforce Ready. So that was really nice, because that wasn't one more thing that was going to create a barrier, that our employees are eligible and want to and need to tap into these types of leaves. But how do you get that to them, and how do you make that visible, and the awareness that here's the mechanism for doing it? So that was actually a great success story for us, because it didn't take our payroll technician more than a day or two to set it up. And then now, if an employee needs to go on emergency paid leave, they see that just populate in their Kronos timesheet, and their supervisor approves it, and it's trackable. I think for grant compliance, that's one of the biggest things. Emergency paid leave is a relatively new allowable cost for us. That's not typically something you would see a federal grant paying for, but most of the agencies have been very generous in their broad applicability, that yes, all of this is covered with the nature of the grant, just from what's happening. So at some point, you're going to need to track it and show it, and it's going to need to be auditable. I'm going to need to have some type of paper trail to show, even as we were giving all of these eligible leaves, how do I show the funder what was paid work on the grant versus admin leave because of COVID? And I have the tracking ability in my system to really clearly identify emergency leave hours versus paid work. And that's something on a paper timesheet I don't think I'd ever be able to do effectively, or probably not efficiently, at least. And I think that's another issue on the university side that they're going to have to grapple with is the tracking, because at some point down the road, we will all get audited on how we made it through this time frame. And I think that's one more safety net I'm feeling really good about, is that if I had to pull a report to demonstrate how much COVID leave we actually applied to individual projects, I could do that in a minute, and that's amazing.
Wow. Anything else? Like anything forward looking? I know we're not out of this one yet, but anything you would have done to prepare differently, or anything you're thinking about doing?
Yeah, I think this environment and this challenge has definitely put into perspective which business processes we're really excelling at remotely and which ones are still pretty clunky and need to be thought out a little bit better, because we're not coming back to campus anytime soon. Our fall instruction is going to be virtual with very limited face-to-face. So my staff is pretty much settled in to be working from home for the majority of the next 6 months, if not longer. So I need to have the ability to troubleshoot some of these more paper-based processes that we still have. Payroll is one that I'm not worried about, and our timekeeping system is 100% remote, but our onboarding and our hiring process is still a very paper-based system, and that requires some essential personnel still physically in the office, verifying I-9s and doing other types of intake. So that's really my next step area to address, to figure out how can I leverage electronic-based systems to get off of the paper hiring. And there's ways that we're looking into to integrate the HR module into what we currently have for payroll. Because my goal and my vision would be if I can have a remote employee sign up, be hired, be paid, submit their time, start to finish, and never have to walk on campus, then I can succeed in this type of emergency environment. And hopefully one day they can come back to campus and have that interaction, because we don't want to only have that option. But I like the idea that if that technology is available and accessible, then I need to prioritize and get that in place. So I'm not left with these paper-based systems that really do handicap your ability to be dynamic and flexible and quick in an emergency situation.
Well, that's great. We'd love to help you with that and get you into a position where you're feeling great for the next crisis, or even just sort of having more efficient processes all the way through. So thank you so much, Casey. That was great. Really, thank you so much for sharing your experiences.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Shauna, how about you? How did PACE do it? I think you were the epicenter for a while. How did you guys work? How did you manage through that process? What any lessons that you might have learned?
Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon, everyone. For us, PACE, we've been working on going paperless, or go green, as folks say, for quite a while, starting with Chronos back in 2002. We transitioned from paper timesheets to an automated system from the payroll point of view. And that's really prepared us in this crisis to switch from on campus to working remotely. As you mentioned earlier, higher ed is not a place or not an environment that people typically work remote. So it was an adjustment for folks in terms of their work habits, but not from a timesheet perspective. For us, we've been on New York State. It's been on pause since mid-March. And so Pace University went to remote learning, as well as remote work for all non-essential staff and student workers. And not all employees or student workers can really work remote. So the university had to adjust some policies, knowing that they needed to ensure that they can support our hourly staff and student workers as much as possible, at least through the end of the spring semester. We're a semi-monthly payroll shop, and so our staff members or professional employees get paid and really just record their exceptions in the time card system. But our student workers, as well as our part-time staff, our hourly staff, they get paid based on the hours that they've submitted for timekeeping. And so we had to quickly just update our policy so that we were able to support those students that were willing to work but did not have the capability, or have work to do, right, based on their function, to be able to work remotely. So we updated our policy and implemented some new pay codes, some new accrual leaves to be able to support them. So for our student and really our hourly population, if they were willing and they're able to work based on their job role remotely, they worked remotely and recorded their time remotely, got their approvals in and processed by payroll, all done remotely. But for the other population, what we did was we updated our policy to say, based on their regular their normal scheduled hours that they're supposed to work. And if they're not able to work, we set up pay codes that we can pay them based on their normal schedule. So the managers would go in and they would, record their emergency leave hours in Chronos, and we were able to leverage the Chronos technology relatively quickly. We did a number of pay code updates as well as accrual bucket updates. And again, as Casey had mentioned earlier, really easy to do within the timekeeping system because everything is remote and online. But also what we did was we leveraged the Chronos community. We didn't remember how to do something, or for our vacation time, we had to update our policy to allow folks to carry over vacation time. Normally we don't. It's, you use all of your time within the vacation year that's allotted. But understanding that this is a new normal for folks, and people, didn't get an opportunity to take vacation time, or additional task was added to their plates. And, we needed to give folks the flexibility to take time. And so we worked, logged into the Chronos community, looked at articles, put in cases. How do we do this? How do we ensure that for folks that are actually sick and they have COVID, that we're not using their sick time, their regular university sick time bucket, that we've implemented another tracking mechanism for, folks that are out sick based on COVID or that are quarantined. So we were able to do that quickly and easily with help of the Chronos community. Tracking and reporting of all of this, as we are, as you mentioned earlier, Jen, New York was the epicenter of the outbreak back in March. And so it was very important for us to be able to track all that was happening within Chronos for our staff and student workers, to be able to report on the hours that were taken, whether it's hours that employees are working remotely from home, or emergency hours that they're taking based on folks just not being able to work, so that we can possibly apply those hours for reimbursements later on.
And you had to do that on the fly, right?
On the fly, yes, on the fly. So as I mentioned earlier, mid-March is New York went on pause mid-March. And so as of March 14th, the university was completely remote. And so, as we're remote, the thought is, okay, how do we make sure that the students, a lot of students depend on their paychecks to help pay for their tuition or just for regular housing. How do we ensure that we're supporting them? And we needed to do to make those updates quickly and to disseminate the information to managers. And again, we've been using the timekeeping system for quite a while, so it was relatively easy. And what we didn't remember, again, the Chronos community really helped us, research a quick article or put a ticket in. How do we track this separately? We need to be able to report on them, whether through Genies or regular reporting. And we were able to do that really on the fly, and we didn't miss a beat, tracking the regular or the normal hours, versus, hours that someone's working. Now we were able to do relatively easily.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you use that flexibility to be able to meet the needs of your employees and meet the needs of the regulations as they changed and came down.
Yes, that is accurate.
Super. Shauna, thank you so much. For anything else or to share, or that's a lot?
I would say that people always say, going green, it's a cliche, and we use that terminology all the time. And so people don't think about what it really means, and what going green does in terms of any organization really switching modes. And, again, at PACE, most employees are on campus. You're interacting with students. Even the administrative staff, you're interacting with students in some form or shape. And so, being able to switch our modes quickly to say we're now going to be remote workers, and having the systems in place to help us do that effortlessly. I can't say enough of. It's not overrated. And it's so important for organizations to really invest, and to take the time to say, how can we ensure that we have these automated systems to make sure that our business is going to continue to flow.
Thanks so much, Shauna. Next up, we have Mandy Cole. Mandy, you've had some similar situations to both of our speakers, but I know, similar to Casey's situation, that you had a portion of your campus that was using Kronos and a portion that wasn't. Did you see any differences or comparisons? I thought perhaps you'd have something interesting around compliance or anything like that.
Yeah, so at K-State, we're a very decentralized institution. So about 4 years ago, we began an initiative to implement shared services, which is the department that I manage, the Administrative Support Center. One of the initial efficiencies that we undertook was to implement electronic time and leave that we could interface into our central PeopleSoft system. We support about 1/5 of the university faculty, staff, and student employees. And the other 4/5 either use paper timesheets, e-time, or server-based electronic systems. And we definitely saw some major differences in how those worked, both the flexibility to make change and the ease in rolling out changes between the electronic time and leave system we use in shared services and the rest of campus. It became very apparent that the heavy use of paper timesheets across the rest of our campus was a difficult transition to make into the remote work world. And so where we were able to essentially have staff ready to go through either desktop or mobile devices to begin recording time as normal from day one of remote work, other departments really struggled to just collect paper timesheets. Our policy still requires wet signatures. And so to do that in a remote environment was not possible. And so having to rapidly make changes to policy in order for them to be able to even input time and leave for payroll was something that we weren't as prepared to do in the systems where we did not implement electronic time and leave. We also worked closely with our central HR in my department to be able to input, as others have mentioned, to be able to input all of the codes that we needed for tracking. So codes both on earnings, we wanted to be able to track the time spent on COVID-related work or earnings, and then also the leave codes that have to do with the Families First Readiness Act. We were able to put those in Kronos very quickly within a day, and then communicate to all of our staff, the 1,700 staff supported out of shared services, how to use those codes appropriately. Whereas to train the other 200 or so HR liaisons across campus about how to communicate that and then record that in paper timesheets and then manually re-enter that into PeopleSoft was a much heavier lift for our central HR unit to be able to actually do that. And so we definitely saw a lot of efficiency in the electronic time and leave system. I said to my staff that I couldn't imagine doing this for 1,700 people without electronic time and leave. Just the lift that it took to get it done in our system was huge. And to be able to do that with only 8 staff members using paper timesheets would have been extremely difficult. And so that really struggled. We were also able to use, the university made some decisions early on to basically, as Shauna mentioned, pay people for the schedules that they should have been able to work, whether they were able to actually work those schedules or not. And that was for both student employees and regular staff at the university. For us, that was fairly easy because we have all of those schedules input into Kronos and we're able to pull them out, put them into their time cards, and then have employees and supervisors approve those. Across campus, that was not as easy. Schedules were stored on Outlook calendars, in Excel documents, in the minds of supervisors. And so just being able to pull that together and be able to make whole our students and staff was very difficult in the time and leave arena, especially for our paper-based systems.
So you used pay from schedule as an option here.
We did, yes. Yep. And then, we talked a little bit about the efficiency and accuracy. So there were really 2 reasons why our department implemented electronic time and leave. We've been in it about 18 months. First, it was an efficiency initiative. So one of the goals of shared services is to identify and implement efficiencies for campus. And the other was for accuracy. So really, we were able to see employees as they punch in and punch out, and then make them whole for those remaining hours, and then have that approval all recorded in the system. So we have a single point of reference to show the hours that were worked, the hours that were added by the university, and then the approval of employees and supervisors that those were accurate. For the non-electronic systems, there were requests done through email, changes through email, through phone calls, and just getting that validation that things were accurate was very difficult when we went to the remote work environment. So that's been challenging for those who are still using paper timesheets in our system.
Especially from the audit trail, as Casey was saying, it's a way to, be sure that you're compliant with whatever rules are that people are charging their time to. Did you have an experience with that?
We did. And one of the things that we actually saw, not as much during COVID specifically, but we got complaints after we first implemented electronic time and leave that the system was creating overtime. What we told supervisors is the system is not creating overtime. The system is now recording overtime that has always been worked and never been captured. And so that, we want to pay employees fairly, and we want to make sure they get paid for the hours they work. And so having a system that allows us to actually see those punches in and out and then have that validation from employees and supervisors has allowed us to be much more accurate in how we pay employees. I would assume that those issues from timesheets have been exacerbated by the crisis. Supervisors are working remotely, and so they don't know if you clock in at 8 or if you clock in at 7:45. And so you might be missing the actual hours worked and paying people accurately outside of an electronic system.
That's so interesting. What else did you see? Like, especially if we talked about having some, some things that you discovered when you were looking at this time and leave during this period of crisis.
Yeah, so I think, some of the things that we were able to see are just how inefficient we have been in our time and leave processes. So we've had a couple of external consultants who have noted that paper time and leave at Kansas State University is one of the least efficient processes on our campus. And you can see that even more so in times of crisis. So where we were able to, within a day, make pretty rapid changes in the system, communicate those to employees supported by shared services and in the Kronos system, our central HR unit was having to take weeks to develop talking points, help others get trained in how to input those things into the system, and just an inordinate amount of manual effort to track those things. Our leave forms are all done electronically through email if we're not using an electronic time and leave system. And so those emails going back and forth between employees and supervisors, sometimes 2 or 3 times approving the same leave. And then the HCS liaison has to print that form out and then manually rekey it back into our PeopleSoft system. And so just the inefficiency in that and the capacity there for manual error to happen is something that we really realized once we went to electronic time and leave how much manual error there could have been in our system before. And I think that's just been even more evident in the COVID crisis. As we've worked with Central HR, they come to our shop and help us sort of figure out, okay, how do we put this into Kronos? And then they take whatever we've done and say, okay, now how can we roll this out through the rest of our campus community? And it takes quite a bit more effort to get it out manually to people to be able to input it on paper timesheets. And so I know that our central HR has also been doing much more manual entry on behalf of the rest of those other 4/5 of campus, just to make sure that things are done accurately, that people are being paid for their full schedules, and that we're tracking the time as best we can. And so we know that it started a lot of conversations on our campus actually about the efficiencies and accuracies in electronic time and leave, and how that's probably an area that we need to focus on in this sort of new environment as we continue to work remotely, that we need to understand more about how we might roll that out further and how that could work for the rest of our campus.
When we talked last, Mandy, you talked about some of the results that you had seen Anything to share there?
Yeah, so we've been really excited. As I mentioned, we kind of went into electronic time and leave with a goal to find efficiencies and to improve accuracy. And we've certainly seen both of those things. So we're about 1.5 years into electronic time and leave. We have 8 employees, and so we are able to support all of the HR activities for about 1,700 employees across campus with 8 staff members. We saw actually savings of about 2.5 FTE since we implemented Kronos. So we were able to add additional departments to our shared service center without additional staffing, often in the level that we thought we might need because we had capacity in our own staff. It's been much easier then for us to be able to pick up new responsibilities as well because of some of that capacity that we have. So our central HR has leaned a little bit more on our department to help them think through policies because we have both the expertise in some of those areas and the ability to help them with some of that as well. And so just that sort of in the efficiency world, we've seen a ton of efficiency for our staff. In terms of accuracy, that's something we saw as well. So I mentioned the complaint from supervisors that Kronos created overtime, and our response that Kronos did not create overtime. Kronos showed overtime that already existed. And we went through a couple of overtime audits where we actually paid out some employees who pre our electronic time and leave system had not been accurately reporting their time. And so went back and made that right for employees. And going forward, we feel much more comfortable that we're accurately paying employees, that they are reviewing and approving their timesheet on a biweekly basis, and that that's also being approved by their supervisor so that we're paying people fairly. And that's been a really big benefit for us for the time and leave system.
Wow, nothing more important than paying your employees accurately for the time that they've worked.
Yes. Yeah, we have a lot of employees who want to donate time. We have great employees who just do what they can for the institution, but that's not the right thing to do. And so just being able to feel like we do accurately pay people for the time that they work has been a huge benefit for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Mandy, so much. Thanks for sharing your insights. So Ken, how about you? You have a medical group under your purview, as well as having overseen other changes within your university. Can you share some thoughts or takeaways from your experience, different things that you did that Kronos helped?
Sure. As the COVID-19 made its way into our country, and we've seen the closure of businesses, and in our case, our university, we had to look at how can we still be able to handle paying our employees, specifically for the employees where their job required them to be on site. How can we still pay them until we're able to get them back on into the specific locations to work? So what we've done is utilize the holiday engine in Kronos to populate the days they work with what we call the COVID paid pay code. And what that allows us to do is ensure that they would still get paid, even though they weren't technically able to do their job on site as required. However, as things opened up, it's a moving target to determine, okay, who can or cannot be on site to work. So as opposed to run into that potential issue, we set up the system so that if they were to punch in, whether it be a Kronos clock or a web timestamp, that the hours that were worked from punching in and punching out will deduct from the hours preloaded into the COVID paid pay code for that day. What that allowed us to do is not inadvertently overpay or underpay the employee for that day for which they worked. So that allowed us to really take a very pragmatic approach for that situation for the clinical folks that were the first to be implemented with this new policy. The policy itself was so successful that we rolled this same behavior out to the rest of our hourly employees that were in the same situation where in order for them to work, they had to be on site. but as until things were opened up, we're able to actually properly pay them through each of our payrolls here. So in that case, they handle that situation. The holiday engine, that is one of the key components in the workforce timekeeper system, really helped us out to handle that particular use case. As we go further into this situation, we had additional policies that we had to essentially change on the fly. One of those was that due to the nature of the COVID-19, we had to fine-tune our accrual policy as it relates to vacation. Typically, or in normal circumstances, our vacation policy is a use it or lose it. So essentially, once the fiscal year ends, if you didn't use all the vacation allotted to you, you essentially couldn't use it for the next fiscal year. That's pretty much our standard policy across all of our workforce. However, due to COVID, we had to take a reasonable approach to sort of that restrictive policy, and we implemented a policy where essentially we'll allow them to carry over up to half of the vacation accrued for the fiscal year. So essentially, what we're going to do with that time is move that to what we call a vacation bank accrual bucket, so we can separately track vacation taken from the vacation bank as opposed to vacation taken from our standard vacation accrual for the next fiscal year. But one of the things we want to do is make sure that on the front end, this process wasn't complex for the timekeeper in terms of, okay, what pay could use to pull from vacation bank, which pay could to use to pull from vacation. So we're going to utilize the accrual cascade feature to essentially say, first, expend the balance available in the vacation bank. Then once that is done, then go down to the standard vacation accrual bucket to pull hours from the vacations they may take throughout the year. This allows us to use, for a timekeeper, to use one pay code and one pay code only, as opposed to trying to jostle which pay code, where I'm at, what's the balance, and those kinds of things that may confuse the timekeeper and cause mispay or corrections that have to happen after payroll has been processed. So that helps with keeping things simple on the front end for a process that's could be somewhat complex on the back end. Keep things simple on the front and not expose timekeepers to any kind of confusion that may cause them to improperly track vacation for their employees. What we also did as well for some of our folks is implement a comp time policy during the time for which our essential folks are working during a scenario. Essentially, our essential employees are required to be on campus, and in order to help, with them be awarded for, taking that extra step to work on site, we utilized or developed a comp time policy, which essentially that for every hour worked, half that time will go into a comp time earned bucket with a max of up to 2 weeks. So we implemented that, and what that allows that to do is almost as a thank you, so that that's additional time they can take for whatever they want to use it for. In the future, it could be time off or what have you on top of their standard vacation to use it moving forward. So the comp time policy, once again, we utilize the accruals engine to allow us to track that, so that for every hour earned goes to a comp time earned pay code, which then populates an accrual bucket called comp time with a max of up to 2 weeks that they have available to use for now or even well into the next fiscal year. So, with these organic changes that we're finding with regards to changing our policies on the fly to help accommodate a workforce working in a very challenging environment, we found that Kronos has the tools available for us to be able to be more fluid in accommodating these new policies that are being implemented to accommodate our workforce as we get through this COVID-19 scenario moving forward.
And Ken, it sounds like administering that stuff centrally also gave you the opportunity to feel comfortable that everybody was being fairly implemented into the new system. So comp time was being equally allocated across the board.
Yes, that's correct. So the rules pretty much same across the board. There's nothing to suggest that, well, it's different for this group or that group. We have a very, standard rule of how we're going to handle this. So we said to make sure that cascaded down through all of our different, workforce that we have here at Temple. We have a mixture of bargaining, non-bargaining. So it was pretty much a whole mix of types of employees, but with Coronas, we're able to accommodate and implement that policy universally and consistently across all of our workforce population.
The flexibility that you needed to be able to create new policies and implement new policies mid-year certainly sounds like it was challenging. I'm glad you had some automated solutions to help you.
Yeah, I mean, the more challenging part was finding out what policy we wanted to, how we defined the policy. What was the policy supposed to be? Once that was decided, then taking that and building out was more or less from a setup standpoint within the system. All the pieces are there, just connecting everything and make sure it works and providing additional reports or tools so that our supervisors and timekeepers on the front lines are able to properly track and see how those pieces all tie together and ensure that their employees are probably getting accommodated for comp time earned as well as being able to use that time. So it was pretty much from a configured standpoint, the nature of how Cronus configures and everything's all building block based. It wasn't as challenging as it could have been had it been another system.
That's awesome. Ken, thanks for sharing your views on this. It's great to hear that you were able to manage through this crisis, actually still managing through this crisis, and able to sort of treat some of your employees and give some of your employees some extra benefits and accrual time, as well as some flexibility in being able to use that. So thanks, Ken.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak with you all today with some of the things that we have implement within the Corona system. So I appreciate giving the opportunity to share that with you today.
Thanks.
And actually, thank you to everybody. It's been a really great process to hear the panel and hear everybody's insights, some of which are similar to each other and some of which are different. I truly hope that you all in the audience have enjoyed hearing our panel as well and have found the conversation interesting and hopefully even enlightening. Don't forget to join us in the networking lounge, where you can continue to ask questions, interact with speakers, and actually find short video demonstrations of some of the items that we talked about today. Feel free to join that for as long as you would like. Thank you again so much. We enjoyed being here today, and we hope to see you again on a webinar in the future. Have a great day.